Hello class, so what we're going to do here is take a look at exposure control. So I'm going to, and for some reason it's not here, so let me just adjust my workspace like we've done in the previous class. There we go, quick tab. Boop. What we're going to do is go through images and ultimately make adjustments. Now the sort of first thing you typically do when you go to sit down and make adjustments, so this is after you've chosen images, you want to look at exposure and you want to go ahead and make adjustments where needed. So if I go ahead and click on my quick tab, I've got my histogram here, so I can see if an image is optimally exposed or not, just looking at a histogram. So I'm going to compare these three images of this condo downtown above Milestones. And what we're going to do is take a look at the first one. So if I look at the histogram in the first one, I can tell that a lot of tonality is shifted to the right. There's not a lot of tonality in the shadow area or the black area of the image. And I can kind of just by looking at it tell there's not a lot of detail on the side of the building. If I turn on my there we go, exposure warning. I can tell that all this red is ultimately overexposed. There's no detail there. If I go to this image, it gets a little bit better. You can see that a lot of data is now no longer clipped, but however, I'm still looking at the front of my building being clipped. If I look at this particular image, then I can see that my data is actually more or less in the middle. Now it is kind of crazy because there's a lot of midtone just because of the gray of the inside of the I guess lobby area. And there's still a lot of white because, well, there still is a lot of lighter gray and white area in the actual image itself. But that would be more optimally exposed compared to the three. And that's just by looking at my histogram. Okay. Now, what I want to show you is we're going to open up, where's my exposure control? Oh, it's right there. I'm actually going to move that here. Yeah, I find that more useful to be up here. Um, Followed by high dynamic range. What I want to do is adjust an image. So I'm not actually going to use these as an example. I'm going to go back to my library panel and I'm going to pop open my exposure guide images in another session. And as you can see, it really is super simple to switch between sessions. There we go. This is first year student Shante. And what we're going to do is show you, what I'm going to do is show you guys um, what it looks like when things are optimally exposed ultimately. Okay, so we're going to try out the exposure warning for now. And what we're going to do, because this is actually my neutral exposure, I want to go down to, this is my n minus 4. So this is pretty much underexposed by 4 stops. And I want to show you guys what happens when I try to adjust that exposure. So if I look at my histogram, yeah, it's obvious the majority of my tonality is in the shadow area. If I use my exposure slider, I can increase the exposure or decrease the exposure. I mean, I wouldn't decrease any further. But I'm going to go ahead and increase the exposure to pretty much the max here, 4. Now that also pretty much corresponds with stops. So 4 stops and the tonality kind of sits more or less in the middle. I'm going to come to this image now, which is 3 stops underexposed. And if I slide the slider over to 3-ish, same idea. It starts to look a little bit better. Now you can also just physically type in. So I know that this next image is my n minus 2, so I'll just type in 2, hit enter, and then this will slide up to 2 stops. And then finally 1 stop. There we go. And then these images should more or less look the same. These two images look a little different, and there's a reason for that. So what I'm going to do is use my loop tool up at the top here, and that is also P on the shortcut key. And a loop is a fancy magnifying glass. What we're going to use this for is looking at some areas of the photograph. So I'm going to take a look at the gray card. And it doesn't quite look solid, and this doesn't also quite look black in terms of my gray card here. So if I go to my n minus, or my n, my neutral, if I take a look at it in comparison, it looks a little less noisy. I don't see much distortion in that, and that tonality looks proper. Let's put them side by side for a sec. And what I can see here is grain, or noise in this case, not grain, noise, distortion, and I can see, well, I don't see noise. Okay, so what that'll do is indicate that I cannot really bring an image back from 4 stops without degrading quality. If I click on my 3 stops, that noise becomes a little less. 2 stops, not bad. 1 stop, not bad at all. Now, if I go the opposite way, so let's go ahead and click on my 4 stops overexposed. Let's well, let's take a look at this. I'm going to drag my exposure the opposite way and we'll see what happens. There we go. Bam. Okay. And this one will do 3. I'll just type it in because it's easier. And then 2. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. -2. And then -1. Boop. And now the 1 stop, you don't see much of a difference here. The 2 stop, you can take a look at the gray card. You can see it starts getting really distorted. This sort of looks like an odd color shift. And Shantae's shirt starts to look really weird. And there's no detail in the card. And this one's the worst. You can see the tree in the background looks really wonky. There's just no detail in the gray card. And the same thing with Shanti's shirt. Same idea. There's just no detail in that shirt. And it's just a white mess. Again, even if, I guess that won't make sense if I turn that on. Even if you have an image that's overexposed, once the image has clipping or the area of the image has no detail, then ultimately what happens is the computer cannot process that data, so it just leaves it as pure white, regardless of what you do. When you start to darken it down, it goes from pure white to pure kind of gray, ultimately, and you just don't get detail. So instead of having a big white mess, you get a big sort of gray mess, and that's ultimately what has happened with Shantae's shirt and Shantae's gray card that she's holding. So there you go, guys. That's adjusting exposure. So this is why you would never want to do this with over and underexposed images, and that's why we do the exposure guide exercise to show you. From there, what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to sample images, which is the images that I provided for you last week. There we go. Now, these images, they're not, like, we've got maybe a stop and 2 stops overexposed. I could adjust the middle one. There we go. With my exposure tool a little bit and bring back some detail, and it would be fine. Okay. There we go. That's it, guys. That's how you adjust exposure. Now, you do also have high dynamic, before I mention that. I'm going to reset the image. Sure, reset all 3 images. And you do have the ability to try to bring back in just highlight detail. And you can see on my histogram, all it's going to do is shift this area of the highlight area or white area over to the left. There you go. And that'll try to bring back some detail in the building, so I can start to see some of the brick line of that sandstone. Shadow area would be the same idea, so if I come into here, I can bring back my shadow area independently. But again, what this is ultimately doing, it's compressing my tonality on the edges, so you kind of lose a bit of contrast when you do this. So this is so important, why we want to get something ultimately exposed in camera, which is why we teach you guys to be accurate within a half stop in your camera lighting classes. But there you go, guys. That is how we adjust exposure in Capture One, and ultimately what you're going to do is adjust your exposure before you do anything else.